Capital Insight. I'm State Representative Kevin Mannix from Salem, and I'm your host for this program, which is designed to give all of us a little more insight into what goes on around our capital and the people who work in and around the capital. Our guest today is a gentleman who is very actively involved in housing issues, especially in terms of providing housing for those who have lower income in our society. John Gail, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
I heard about you in terms of the housing network, so to speak, the folks talking about the need for housing in our communities and everything. And I was surprised to find out that you're the brother of someone that many of us know, Harvey Gail, and who is married to Mary Louise Van Natta Gail. So there seems to be a family connection here. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself, where you're from?
Yeah, well, I grew up in Newburgh, Oregon, and I went to high school there. I played soccer and was involved in student leadership. From there, I went to college down in California, at University of California, San Diego. And I liked the sunny weather, but I decided to come back because I love Oregon. And I wanted to find a job up here where I can try and make a difference. And so now I work for a nonprofit housing company here in Salem, where we are implementing a home ownership program called Hope 3.
Okay, now we're going to talk a bit about Hope 3. I'd like to flesh out your background a little more. What did you major in when you were in school?
I studied urban studies and planning and political science, so I have a double major.
Do you find that those two issue areas overlap a lot?
Well, yes, I do. I think especially when I did some internships with the city of Martinez and the city of Newburgh, politics and urban studies and planning are intertwined very much so. And so it has been a very beneficial background to come from.
What kind of work did you do in those internships?
Well, as for the city of Martinez in California, I was basically the person that met the people at the counter when they first had questions about planning. They wanted to know things about various zoning laws, heights of fences and setback requirements, and also I would research those questions for them and then provide them preliminary guidance as to how to proceed with their interests.
So what did you do after those internships?
Well, after the internships, after the city of Martinez, I came back to Oregon and started looking for a job, and I was fortunate that Oregon Housing and Associated Services had a planning grant to plan a home ownership program called Hope 3. So I hooked up with them and rigorously began planning the program, trying to consider all facets of the program and to put it onto paper, where we applied for then an implementation grant, which we received just in December of '93.
So how long have you been working on this project?
Well, I started in November of '92 planning the project. We received funding in December of '93, so about 16 months.
Boy, it took about a year of advance work, more than a year of advance work to get to the point where you could actually get the grant.
That's right. There are lots and lots of various facets of putting together a home ownership program for low-income families. We needed to work through the financing aspects of it. We needed to work through raising matching funds, which we did. For every dollar we requested in funds, we had to, for every $3 we requested, we had to identify $1 in local match. So we were out working with local private companies and various agencies and raising that match, and the response was really overwhelming. The banks and Temecula Community College and lots of local folks really kicked in to raise $306,000 in local match. So this is a program really that's come from local support.
Now your position right now is with Hope 3. Are you executive director, or what's your title?
My title is a housing rehab specialist. My job is to find the properties and then supervise fixing them up.
Now, tell us a little bit about how Hope 3 operates. What's the concept behind it?
The concept behind Hope 3 really came from Jack Kemp's HUD administration, U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. And what they were seeing is a lot of houses owned by the government that could have been great resources to help people get into housing. But instead what was happening is a lot of investors were buying these houses, using them up, and the opportunity for affordable housing was missed. So Hope 3, designed somewhat like Habitat for Humanity, designed to help nonprofits and municipal agencies get those properties, fix them up to a good standard, and then help low-income families buy them. And the idea also is to help the families that are currently in public housing to get out of public housing and into home ownership. So that's really the nature of where it all came from.
Sounds like that there are several winners in this process. I could identify, first of all, the low-income folks who can be winners by having a chance to own their own home. I would think that neighborhoods would be winners in the sense that that perhaps decrepit piece of property in the neighborhood will be fixed up, rehabbed to the point that it's very attractive and will bolster neighborhood values and improve probably the atmosphere in the neighborhood. It seems to me also that the folks who are on waiting lists for public housing would benefit because someone else has just moved out and created a space. Is there anyone that's a loser in this process?
I can't identify a loser. It's sort of the Robin Hood scenario. That maybe the losers are the folks, the investors that may not be able to buy that rental house for their next investment. But there are a lot of houses, whether or not they're government owned or not. So I don't even suspect they're much of a loser.
So you focus on government-owned housing, housing that came into government hands. How did it get into government hands?
Well, various means. A typical scenario is a FHA or HUD-insured loan that was foreclosed on. And then HUD would hold the property and then sell it. So that's one example. VA, state VA and federal VA also, when VA loans go in default, they might take a property. Another example is with Marion County, they have a program through their tax foreclosure where they'll help nonprofits buy tax foreclosed properties to fix them up. So that's another example. But also, we're looking at any properties that the state might own through right-of-way acquisition, or any schools might own through expansion, or maybe they need a house moved from a school site onto another site. So wide variety of ways that we're going to be acquiring property.
Is there any method of networking that you might use to connect up with different sources of information, or is there already some information system in place that you just tap into?
To find out about
the housing, yeah.
Well, it's quite an interesting science. You probably have heard or seen in the paper these deals where you can buy a government-owned house for $1. And my experience is I've called a few of those agencies, and they tend to really not have much information. So I wouldn't encourage people to spend their $99 or $100 to get one of those pamphlets, because that's really all they are. Each government agency is listing properties in different ways. Some do it through direct mail. All you need to do is call their office. Others do it through public notices and things, but there's a wide variety of ways. That was quite a bit of my work in the planning grant, is figuring out, well, how do they advertise for these properties. But now we have a developed system, and I know how to contact each one, or they're contacting me, so it does work that way.
I'm just curious, as a side venture here, have you folks thought about, in terms of Hope 3, creating also a housing bank, in a sense, where you say, look, we've tapped into all these sources of information now. Can folks contact you to find out about properties that didn't quite make your list for rehab that might be available to them?
That is a good idea. I'd feel free. If anyone wanted to contact me as to getting any information about houses, I've put together a little packet explaining to people how they can find out about publicly owned properties. Yeah, they could definitely contact me.
Well, you mentioned earlier a phone number that I'll just mention. It may or may not run across the screen, but I'll mention it slowly. It's 585-6193, and that's the Hope 3 telephone number?
That's our phone number for Hope 3 and Oregon Housing and Associated Services.
All right, so 585-6193. That's the number folks can call for some help or some advice. And you had mentioned to me before we went on the air that there are a variety of government programs available to help folks, not just low income, also medium income. Can you give us some idea what is available out there?
Yeah. There are a few programs. One that we strongly recommend people that call in about Hope 3 and are interested in buying their first house, and it's put on by the Oregon Bankers Association, and it's a great source for first getting into the subject of buying your first home. It is put on by local lenders, people that actually make loans in banks, and they will answer any question you have regarding credit, regarding financing packages. They'll spend 6 hours with you and going through every aspect of home ownership and how to buy your first house. It's free, and they come every other month.
Now you
So,
said 6 hours. Is it necessarily 6 hours, or are you just using it as a figure of speech?
it is a 6-hour program.
Wow.
They have a set curriculum, and they go through lots of different facets. But
Home buying A to Z, basically?
basically home buying A
Wow.
to Z. And one of the best things they could find there is information about different financing packages, because different financing packages work better for lower income families given the amount of down payment and closing costs they might require.
Well, why wouldn't a low-income family just walk into a bank and say, I'd like to borrow money to buy a house?
Well, they may not want to do that right off because, first of all, they may not know what to ask the lender about. And there are certain programs that work better. They might want to go into that bank and say, I'd like to learn how to buy a house using FHA-insured financing or using Farmers Home Guaranteed Home Loan Program. So by taking this seminar, they get that background information. And also, an organization called Network for Oregon Affordable Housing, which is a consortium of Oregon lenders, will, by attending the seminar, give you a 1% down payment grant for the purchase of your house.
Well,
So
let me
there's a-
get this. All right, I'm going to buy a $50,000 house, well, maybe a $40,000 house. And I go to this seminar as a low-income person, and I get this information. They'll give me 1% of the value, which would be $400, towards the purchase of a house.
Yeah, exactly.
Hey, it's a deal you can't afford to pass
It's a
up.
very good deal. It's a very good deal.
Can higher income people qualify?
I believe there are some income limits, and that's one thing that the seminar really covers in depth, the various income limits, and each financing packages have different ones.
Well, who should someone call if they wanted to sign up or find out about these
They
Oregon
should call
Bankers seminars?
the Oregon Bankers Association, and I have their phone number here,
They're in the Salem directory too, aren't they? What's their number?
581-3522.
581-3522.
Right,
That's the Oregon Bankers Association, and they have an office here in Salem.
that's right.
Well, tell me about some of the other programs that are available.
Well, let's see. Another one of the programs that's really good is Farmers Home Administration has 2 different programs. One for folks that earn 80% or below median income, and that is really something a person would need to discuss in person with Farmers Home Administration. But this is a program where a low-income family can buy a house in a rural area, and depending on their income, Farmers Home will help give them some assistance on a monthly basis to keep up their payments. They also have another program called the Guaranteed Rural Housing Program, and that program is one of the best in that it does not require a down payment. The buyer needs to pay for the closing costs, but no down payment. The catch is they have to buy a house in an area that Farmers Home Administration is applicable. And essentially in Marion County, that is any area outside the Salem-Keizer urban growth boundary and not including Woodburn. But all other areas are fair game for the Farmers Home program.
Now, I'm curious, you've mentioned so many programs. Why doesn't the federal government just consolidate all these programs? They could have variations on a theme, but just have one core program with a variety of sub-programs so you could just contact one agency for help.
That would be great. I think that's an excellent idea. There is so much misinformation about these programs, and even, sadly enough, I've spoken with some mortgage lenders who weren't aware of the various programs. And so it's a very confusing arena to enter, and especially if you're lower income and you have never bought a house, it can get very confusing. But the idea of consolidating them all would be excellent. There's a few more that I haven't mentioned yet.
Well, we're going to have to go through those in a moment, but I will mention to our audience that you're with us on Capital Insight. I'm State Representative Kevin Mannix from Salem, and I'm your host for this program. Our guest today is John Gail, who is a housing rehab specialist. He's with the Hope 3 program, and we've been talking about a variety of programs that are available to help folks get housing, to get into affordable housing. Now, you were just mentioning, John, that there are a variety of other programs?
There's another program put on by the state of Oregon, Housing and Community Services, and that's referred to as the State Bond Program or the Single Family Mortgage Program. And the idea here is the state of Oregon sells bonds, and by selling the bonds, they're able to get funds at a reduced interest rate. So back when we were seeing 7.5% interest, the state bond program was able to have loans at 6.5% interest, which when you add it up over the course of a 30-year loan, that really makes a huge difference. And it also makes a lower income family able to afford a house because of the lower interest rates.
Well, I'm curious, should the state housing department put together a consortium operation or one-stop shopping and say to folks, come on in to see us, or is there some entity that can do that?
Well, the way the state bond program works is you really wouldn't necessarily contact the state. You would contact your lender and explain to them you're interested in finding out more about if you qualify for the state bond program. Most of these packages, and this is part of the problem, are offered by the lender. And so you need to go to the lenders to find out about them. And because of that, because there are so many different financing packages, lenders might be having problems keeping up on all the programs they have.
Well, that's why I was curious as to why we don't have a program, and again, you mentioned you thought it was a good idea where, say, even our state housing department, not even anybody else, but could just say, look, come in to see us and we'll have a grid book available or something that lists all the programs, where you can go, and what the requirements are, what the eligibility requirements are, what the funding requirements are, what lenders are involved. Is there any compendium like that available other than what you've put together informally?
The best thing that I found was a grid like that offered by the Oregon Bankers Association at their homebuyer training seminar. And that goes through the various financing packages, how much down payment they require, whether or not a gift, and that becomes a big issue, whether or not a family member can gift money to the buying of the house. And that is one of the best resources, but I don't know of anything else of that nature.
So it sounds like a person who is looking into this, besides talking to Hope 3 at 585-6193, that's your phone number, they can contact the Oregon Bankers Association and arrange to come in for the seminar. It's a good investment, it sounds like, 6 hours of their time to really learn all you need to know to look into the housing market.
Definitely. And I attended one of these seminars last fall, and it was amazing how much misinformation there was and how much interest there was in asking questions about credit and things like that.
You mean misinformation by those attending, not by those putting on?
Right. Misinformation by the people that were attending. The folks that put it on are lenders from the community, and they deal with this day in and day out, and they know the programs inside and out. So they're real helpful in answering all the questions.
Well, in terms of the Hope 3 program, you just finished a deadline for applications, so it looks like folks who want to get into your rehab program will not be able to do that for the time being. Is that right?
For the time being, we just wrapped up our first round of outreach and selection. We're going to be developing or buying and fixing up 16 houses over the next 2 years. But when we sell those houses, in years 3 and 4, we'll have 13 more houses. So anyone that's interested in Hope 3 should contact us, and we can put them on our mailing list. And as we get into that next round of outreach, then we will be contacting them and letting them know how to apply.
What kind of inventory of rehab available housing is there in the Salem-Keizer area from your perspective, from what you've seen out there? Is there a lot, or are there a lot of vacant houses? What's it like?
The housing market's pretty tight, and there are not many houses right now, and especially since we're looking for government-owned houses, it makes it even more difficult. It's a very narrow market. Hope 3 really was designed to help some states back east and maybe in the southwest like Texas, where they have a huge inventory of government-owned housing stock. Oregon really doesn't have much, so we are trying as best we can to make this program work. And there is we anticipate last year there were about 60 homes over the course of the year that would have been eligible. So that's why we picked 16. We thought that would be a realistic number that we might be able to get into.
I'm going to pause for a moment again and mention to our audience that you're with us on Capital Insight. I'm State Representative Kevin Mannix from Salem, your host, and our guest today is John Gail. If you ever have any questions about any issues that come up or that actually don't come up on Capital Insight, I hope you'll feel free to call me or write me at Capital Insight, H395, State Capitol, Salem, Oregon 97310. I always am happy to hear from you. Well, turning back to the housing issues that confront us, do you lock in with other groups that are trying to do other things in low-income housing, developers who are trying to put together apartments or anything like that? Or is this a sort of a separate entity? That is, Hope 3 is out there with its own project. Is there any sharing of information that goes on among the various groups involved?
Locally, we have a few organizations that are really active. The Challenge for the Homeless, Habitat for Humanity, and Salem Self-Help Housing. And believe it or not, we all work well together. There is some competition. We're all fighting for the same small pot of money. But in general, I'm really happy with the type of cooperation we're getting from them.
Has the state come forward, the state of Oregon, and talked about some of its own available facilities that may not be traditional houses? And I'll be blunt about it. I think of the Oregon State Hospital, and actually there's some very traditional houses right near there that used to be houses for staff. Some of them are still used and rented by the state. Others seem to be vacant or used for offices and the like, just south of the state hospital grounds. I don't know if you're familiar with that area, but I'm curious if you've heard anything from the state about sharing that. Excuse me.
The state, the best contact I have for the state is through the Division of State Lands. They have a surplus properties list that we're on, and when properties come up that they deem they want to sell, they notify us via this quarterly listing. So far, single-family homes really haven't come up, but who knows what's going to come down the pike.
My friendly tip of the day is to take a look at the state hospital grounds. It's near where I live, and we bicycle around there. And there's probably 20 nice homes that are just south of the main hospital buildings, just south of Center Street. And they're hidden from view unless you happen to be back there and you see them. And apparently they used to be used for housing. Lovely homes, and they don't all seem to be occupied. And I wonder what the state's doing to make use of that facility for housing when we have such a crunch in the market.
Yeah.
I'm curious about something else. There was a proposal once presented to the state, and this is, again, not in your area of expertise, but it touches on housing, to convert some of the Fairview cottages into apartments and housing. Has there been any discussion of getting the state to look at its facilities that are underused or even unused, and convert some of them to multi-unit housing or make them available to nonprofits for conversion?
I am not familiar with any sort of analysis like that. I hope, though, as you know, the governor has asked the various departments to assess their inventories, that they take a real serious look at some of the properties that they have, whether or not they need them any longer, and what they could do for them. We're in a position, and other nonprofits, where we could provide cash for those properties and provide also I think a very worthy use of those properties. The affordable home ownership aspect in Salem is really getting tight. The waiting lists on public housing are in the thousands and thousands, and meanwhile the real estate market is appreciating at as much as 14% a year, so it's getting worse, and now we see interest rates are going up again. So it's getting tighter, and Salem's a very attractive place to move to, and that's causing real estate prices to go up, so the crunch is getting bigger.
Well, where do the people live while they're on the waiting list for public housing? What are the kinds of arrangements that they make?
Well, sadly enough, they're going into homeless shelters, and they're maybe living with relatives, maybe outstaying their welcome. They're living in their cars. They're doing whatever they can just to survive. So there's a real need to decrease those waiting lists to help people get into a decent place to live.
Are there any new directions developing at the state level in the next couple of years, or are tight funds going to restrict things pretty much as far as any new ideas or programs in the housing area?
Well, I'm not aware of any new really innovative ideas coming out right now, especially as far as affordable home ownership. I haven't heard of anything, but I really challenge them to be creative in these tight times, especially with the funds tight. But there's a need for, a lot of people need help, and that would be my challenge to them, is to be creative and to try and figure out how we can get through these hoops faster to help these folks get into decent homes.
Now, over the next 2 years,
how will Hope 3 be working on the acquisition and rehab of these houses? Do you bring in your own crews, or do you contract out? How does that work?
We're going to be doing it two different ways. We get a house that needs maybe $10,000 worth of work. We have arrangements with Chemeketa Community College, their construction training program. They might be able to come in and do some of the work and donate it. And we also have an arrangement with the Oregon Jobs Program out of Chemeketa Community College, where construction trainees from their program, supervised by our construction supervisor, would do minor rehab work. And then the third option would be to contract it out to a private contractor.
And are part of your grant funds used for the purpose of the rehab itself or for a purpose of acquisition? How does that work?
Exactly. We have funds for acquisition, and then we have funds for rehab. We also have to match those funds with donations. So that's why the donated labor tends to be a very good source of match.
Do you see a lot of housing in the Salem area that is being frittered away, that is not being maintained, and then it gets torn down and something new goes in its place? Or are we maintaining the old housing stock while we keep adding to it with new stock, from your surveys?
I think from our experience, some of the houses, if they've been neglected so long, feasibility of replacing them becomes really difficult. But it's certainly more affordable to fix up an old house if you can do it within its fair market value than tearing it down, especially since tearing it down, not only do you deteriorate the neighborhood's character, but you also fill up the landfills. And so I really try, in every option, Hope 3 is designed to rehab houses and not to tear them down.
When you're in the rehab business, so to speak, like this, do you find some real gems in the rough that seem to have been unappreciated till you went to work on them?
Yeah, there's a lot of nice historic homes that really just need some cleaning out and freshening up, and they'll be really nice additions to neighborhoods.
Well, as you're going on with this program, I mean, besides the government list that you've talked about, do you go into neighborhoods and just walk around and look for vacant properties? Well, I guess you're limited to government property, though, in your program. Are there folks who go out there to try to identify, hey, gee, there's this empty house, let's find out who the owner is, or anything like that?
I think that's a great idea. If someone wanted to get into a house, to go into a neighborhood that they think they'd like to live, to keep track of what properties are available, to get the address, to go down to the county assessors, tell them the address, they'll tell you the owner, contact the owner and see what they're interested in selling. Because they have to be creative in finding affordable housing. It's not easy. Sadly to say, the folks that are involved in housing and providing loans and finding housing, they have an incentive to find more expensive houses and to make more expensive loans. But for the low-income family, they really need to be creative in getting out there and doing some of the legwork themselves to find those houses.
Say I'm a person in with a $15,000 a year income and 3 kids. Would I qualify for the kinds of programs you're talking about?
You would definitely qualify for all the programs that I can think of right now. Typically, a family of 4 can earn no more than $25,000 a year. That's what they say is 80% of the median income. So if you earn less than $25,000 a year, you're going to qualify for all the programs we talked about.
Okay. Well, I wish you well in this project. It seems as though we're going to have to be very creative in looking at in as many areas as we can to find a housing stock and to rehabilitate it. And I hope we can encourage folks to call you at 585-6193 for any advice or help, or to also contact the Oregon Bankers Association here in Salem to get their assistance and learn how to buy a house.
Yeah.
With that, I thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
And I thank our audience for joining us on Capital Insight. We'll see you again next time.